Hello, everyone. Guillaume Lutuel here, host of the E-commerce Wizards podcast, where I feature top leaders in e-commerce and business. Today's guest is Caspar Hardholt. He's the CEO and founder of Alumio, which is a company doing system integration with a platform we'll be discussing in a moment. And formerly, he was the founder and CEO of MediaCT, an agency with over 55 employees. So something very similar to what I'm doing, specialize on Adobe Magento and so on. So very interesting skill set here to discuss together as two Magento agency owners having this discussion today. And the main topic will be secrets to a successful e-commerce and system integration project. So even though we'll be focusing through that lens for a merchant, so a company owner or a company director who wants to have a successful project for their system, it could also go all the way to IT projects and so on. So this is very universal knowledge. But here, when we're talking e-commerce and system integration, you can easily have, just for the system integration, several tens of thousands of dollars of budget. And then you add the e-commerce, and depending how far you want to go, you could be talking not just $100,000, but a few hundreds of thousands of dollars. And this can be a very significant project, and it's totally worth spending the time on how can I make those kind of project with such large investment be a successful project. And that's what we're going to be discussing today. Sorry. Before we get started, our little sponsorship message. This episode is brought to you by MageMontreal. If a business wants a powerful e-commerce online store that will increase their sales, or to move piled up dormant inventory to free up cash reserves, or to automate business processes to gain efficiency and reduce human processing errors, our company, MageMontreal, can do that. We've been helping e-commerce stores for over a decade. Here's the catch. We're specialized and only work on the Adobe Magento e-commerce platform. If you know someone who needs something Magento, debugging, development, design, maintenance, anything, we got their back. Email our team, support@magemontreal.com, or go to magemontreal.com. That's MAGE Montreal.com. All right, Caspar, thank you for being here today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So you have a very interesting background. Can you tell us just a little bit more about yourself before we go into the main topic?
Yes, of course. Well, my name is Caspar, and I'm from the Netherlands. I've been in IT e-commerce since 2002, and we basically accidentally rolled into the Magento domain back in 2009 with our agency back then. And that was a great fit with our background, and I think also our like good experiences with e-commerce until then. And we wanted to create our own e-commerce platform. So we were, designing the interface. We're trying to build our own platform, and then we accidentally, came across Magento. So and it was in the Netherlands. It was a big uplift from that point. So. We turned our entire agency to Magento only focused company. We were an enterprise partner in the Netherlands. And within that company, which I founded, we also worked on a lot of integrations. And that's basically the core reason why I founded Alumio and left, I actually sold my previous company to focus fully on my integration platform called Alumio, to help all kinds of agencies and companies across the world solving integration challenges. So that's my background.
Okay, well, thank you. So integration challenges, there are plenty of those. So that's for sure.
Yes,
well, there'll be no
correct.
shortage of challenges to discuss about. So let's start a bit high level. Again, from the point of view of a business owner or project director on the client side who's hiring providers here to do that integration work, what should he focus on to have a successful project? Like, what comes to mind first?
I think people. So you could talk about technology, you could talk about like hiring the right company, but in essence, it comes to the hiring the right people and determining how you want to build up the e-commerce business unit. Because every project will be a failure or a success based on the people who lead the project, basically, or the business unit. So the first thing that pops up is people.
Very good. Okay, that's
That's a bit
interesting.
abstract. I know.
No, well, it is a high level. It's a very high level.
Very high level, yeah.
Yes.
Mm.
So, indeed, people. I agree. Like in the general way, if we put them in order, I would say people comes first, then
Yes,
processes come second, and tools comes last. Because if you
correct.
have the right people, they can make an imperfect process and tool work. If you have good processes and limited tool, it's still going to work. But if you have the best tool and bad processes and bad people, it's never going to work.
It will never work. No, I absolutely
So
agree.
yeah.
And I think that having the right knowledge within the company really gives you the ability to hire an agency and be successful. Because if you put all your, I think all your um, if you lean too much on the agency, it will also potentially cause the wrong decision based on the gut feeling that you had with an agency. So I think having knowledge with your company is also very important, and that goes together with people, of course.
Okay. Well, while we're talking about people, a bit more the tactical or tangible, I believe the merchant who's hiring the agency should have someone dedicated in-house to the project. That's one of the
Absolutely.
key factor for success, to actually have time for the project. We're all busy running our companies. We have a million problems to
Yes.
solve, but
Yes.
that's one key factor that I've observed. Like, and when the CEO or president wants to take on the project and be the main contact, for me, that's always a red flag.
A red flag. Yeah.
In the sense that the guy will likely run out of time. Sometimes it's not the case. I've seen some large enough and mature enough company that I would say I was privileged enough to have that working relationship for like a year with the CEO. That was his top project, but that's because the company was large enough in the eight-figure business, and that the president had nothing left to do if he wanted in the company.
Yeah.
So he decided that he was doing the website. That's pretty much it.
But those are the 98% of the times it's usually a company a merchant that wants to start an e-commerce or like rebuild an e-commerce platform, doesn't want to allocate budget on a person leading the project internally. So they think they actually save money by doing it themselves. In the end, it will cost them more money.
Yeah,
and time.
Sure.
And time is even more expensive.
So what I say is that the person assigned in-house at that company, it must be their number one priority to be this IT or web or system integration or e-commerce project, and anything else, if they have free time, comes second. So when we need like an approval for something or whatever, as the vendor, like they run with it, they get it, and nothing blocks. So that having that sort of overcapacity in a way of handling the project, that is one critical path.
Yes, and I also think that the person, I think a lot of managers, we have so many management styles, right? So you can lead a project on a very traditional way or in a more modern way based on agile project owner kind of role. And I think the majority of the agencies or system integrators that are around like to work on an agile kind of basis, whether it's like adapting the framework entirely or just like trying to use some parts of the agile framework. But I think to me, the best managers that I've seen were educated on the product owner domain, and also had the ability to do things within Magento Adobe themselves. Basically, understanding how to configure or how to tweak kind of small things within the system itself. Not on code level, but on like user interface level.
So you mean a project manager that has a bit of hands-on capability, that he's not a purely theoretical guy, that he knows how stuff works in the platform that he's working on. Let's say in this case, let's pretend it's a Magento integration.
Yes.
He knows a bit Magento, that project manager. So that's a criteria that you look for.
To me, I think such a person knows how to bridge the gap between the business flow, the business case, and also the business processes, but also how to implement that within the Magento platform. Because if you leverage the platform itself without, knowing what kind of capabilities it has, allows you to deploy the platform much better and much more efficient and much more cost effective than if someone doesn't know that. So that for me, that's I think that's a very important aspect.
Okay, so if I sort of rephrase what you're saying here, is that on the vendor's side, who's providing the system integration, all that, the level of skill and knowledge of the architects of the solution in a way, because he has to analyze the business needs, and
Yes.
then he has to see what the solution has as capability, and then sort of come up with what's the best solution to solve this from a technology point of view, and comparing, let's say, option A versus option B for the cost and upsides and downsides and all that.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying it should be like a solution architect or someone who knows a solution thoroughly, but more of a person that understands it on a high level, understands how to, if you configure a payment, like for example, a payment integration, like a payment extension. If you understand how the refunds work or credits, or how actually the payment process works, it helps you making better decisions. I'm not
Sure.
saying that you should know the entire solution, but understanding it from a high level allows you to make better decisions
Yeah.
based on the recommendations of your system integrator.
Yeah. So what we used to call on the Magento world the solution specialist. So the high level business knowledge, but also high level technical knowledge of the platform. So to be able to merge those two together, like the quality of the person who's going to be making that kind of solution, the solution specialist at the vendor side makes a huge impact on the project.
Yeah, and I think that nowadays Adobe offers a lot of like courses and trainings to become a solution specialist, at least at a high level. And I would really recommend every product owner or person within a company, like a merchant, to do such a course.
Very good. So on the people side, maybe you have other ideas, but then I guess the rest would come more on the people side, would be about the habits, like and the processes that the vendor would follow. So, for example, we want to prevent scope creep on both sides. So the vendor wants to prevent scope creep to maintain profitability, but the merchant wants to prevent scope creep to not be billed extra, because the scope creep, the vendor will try to bill it.
Yeah.
So one thing for this is a really good project plan. When the whole thing starts, I see a lot of vendors, I see a lot of people, competitors quote on the market and so on, that are just not detailed enough. They're too high level. Sometimes the initial proposal can be high level, fine.
Yep.
But then how is this feature really supposed to work when it connects with your ERP, your enterprise resource planning system, or your accounting system? There's a lot of intricacies. Oh, we have 10 pricing levels, and then we have other subdivision of how this works. But if you're in this state or province, it does not work with the same price grid, then how does a credit note applies, and all kind of other rules like this. We will not ship a partial batch. We'll ship only full batches. Even if we have inventory, you cannot add batches together for your inventory control. All kind of like crazy little detail like this that totally impacts the scope of work of doing integration, that you need the proper level of detail in the proposal, in the requirement document, which could be called a BRD, build requirement document. Could be called an SRS, software requirement specification. Some may use other words, SOW or whatever. But you need a very detailed breakdown of the use cases of what it's supposed to do. And if the vendor does not have the detail-oriented mind enough to do all that breakdown, you're going to run into issues and budget problems.
Well, I absolutely agree. And I see this many times. So this is actually something very relevant, I think, because also I see a lot of system integrators and also merchants who are, they're basically drafting the high level requirements, and then they boil down to the user stories right away. So the actual, this is what we're going to do, but without clear acceptance criteria, without clear, basically some kind of canvas, empty canvas, like this may go left or it may go right, and this may be the end goal.
Yeah.
And a lot of projects actually fail because a lot of Scrum following companies, system integrators, are stepping over that part too quickly. And indeed, the functional description of a project is actually is a time-consuming part, but it's essence if you go to the actual development. Because if you're not doing that, you're not leveraging the best features of Adobe, and you're going to create a lot of things that the merchant does not really need.
Yeah.
And that I think that's the point where scope creeping starts.
Yeah.
And nobody wants scope creeping, and it's suddenly, it's the big elephant in the room. It becomes like a thing, and then after a couple of months, everybody's like, "What happened?"
Yeah. Why does the project take twice longer and cost twice much more, and nobody's happy?
Nobody's happy, and of course, the merchant is like pointing fingers, and the agency is pointing fingers back. So it doesn't benefit anybody. No.
Yeah, so it starts with a very quality project plan. So just in more layman's term, if somebody's not used with the agile lingo of the agile work here, it starts with the project plan should have a good user story. So what does that mean? Is just in plain terms, who's doing what and why. That's pretty much it. So let's say as an administrator, I want to be able to create a credit note in my e-commerce system, and I must be able to receive it in my ERP so that the two systems are synchronized and I don't have to do data entry twice. So that would be an example of a user story. And then you would have a definition of done. So definition of done is the acceptance criteria, if you wish. So you could say that then as an admin, I was able to create my credit note and I was able to verify that it is received without flaws in the ERP. That's an example. And then once you have your acceptance criteria, nobody can start arguing or having conflict. Is the work done? Yes or no? Because it becomes more binary, black or white. Here is the work done. You say, when I go there, can I create a credit note? Yes or no? And does it sync back to my ERP? Yes or no? So if the answer is yes, and there's no problem there's no bug, it syncs correctly, you could say the work is done. There's more detail, of course, in the user experience, interactivity, and stuff like that, but that could be also considered in a different budget. But the mechanic is there of the functionality. And you should have a technical solution in a good project plan. Like, how will you do this? Well, this is in whatever API connection endpoint or something that the technician will write the technical solution there. And there should be a budget for this specific use case here, this user story that we're talking about. So if you have a very detailed project plan like this, with every single use case being listed, and then every acceptance criteria or definition of done for when is the job finished, and what are the planned technical solution for each of those things, and the technical solution, if it changes, of course, it's going to change the budget. I sometimes gave as an example, if you decide to build something with a building with a wood structure, or if you build it as a commercial building with a steel structure, the price is not the same at all. So if you change the technical solution, even though the size of the building is the same and whatever, you change the technical solution, the price won't change. So the technical solution must be there. Otherwise, you cannot control budget properly.
The user story alone is not sufficient. I think that's the core message and the main message. And I think a lot of the companies that started a decade ago or like 15 years ago, they were kind of like rebellion. We didn't want to do it the same way as all of the large system integrators that were doing everything on waterfall and with Prince2 and all kinds of traditional methods that caused a lot of documentation, a lot of painful processes and policies. So we were actually rebellion. We tried to do it different than the rest. And honestly, that also caused pitfalls. So the best scenarios, the best examples are agencies, system integrators who know that you should talk a lot about the business processes of the merchant before writing a user story. Drawing it out, make it visible for the merchant so that they understand that if they send out a credit for an order, does it include partial credits? Does it include partial refunds? How does that process? How does the flow goes? So yeah, that's I really see successful system integrators doing that very, very well.
I agree with you. Yes, start with the business requirement, the discovery process, documentation, typically to what's called a BRD, build requirement document.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
this document only has high-level business requirements without any kind of user story and without technical solution, because it's universal. It could be built on any platform. The BRD is what you will use to receive quotes from
Yes.
vendor, basically, that can then quote from whichever platform on how to fulfill your build requirement, which are business requirement actually. So the BRD would typically be written by a business analyst or business people or business owner with a consultant. Or if that's not already done, in our case, we would help the merchant to write the BRD first, and
Yeah.
then we'll get into the more detailed project plan for the large project.
Well, even with integrations, we our platform gives the user the ability to configure integrations between like Adobe Commerce and ERP systems or CRM, product information management systems, and so on. Even those kind of projects, it seems very like attractive to start configuring right away because you can. But if you don't think about the integration itself, it will it will become a failure. And so the technology can be good, but yeah, if you don't have the right process in place, it will fail.
Yeah. So but you're talking about agile. So like everything else, agile has positive and negative. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I actually, I think the good thing is that it makes you it makes clear roles and rules and responsibilities. So I think it has some very, very good components. Personally, I what I dislike is that it sometimes becomes like a sort of religion and a way to cover up things. And that's not only my personal experience. I hear that more often in the market. People say, "Yeah, but it's agile." We didn't do that, or we did it differently than we were requested because it's agile. So to me, those are the less positive parts of the framework. And when a framework is not being used as a framework, but as maybe a religion is it too like the term is
Rigid,
not
perhaps rigid
no
and blind faith on
yeah
the methodology.
then it's there's a reason why it's called a framework, right? So but I've seen some very successful projects being executed with Scrum based on agile framework. So but that would be my first thing that pops up.
Okay. Well,
What about yours?
yeah, exactly. My impression on that one is, the downside. Let's start with the downside of agile because there's a lot of positive, and in a general way, it's a better way to go. But the downside is there are lots of cowboys out there.
Oh yeah.
So the agile cowboys, I call them, they don't want to spend the time to create proper project plan and to write everything down and plan enough the work. So
Yeah.
the positive of the other alternative, the traditional method called waterfall, because everything cascade from the first task to the second task to
Yeah.
the third task and so on, is that they do a crazy lot of planning up front. So you can benefit from the traditional way of doing things by doing a lot of planning up front, but then switching for the execution to the agile style with iteration. Because in the kind of projects that
Okay.
we're doing, there are lots of unknowns. And when it comes to project risk management and unknowns, agile is way better. And also, the waterfall project has one fundamentally flawed assumption, which is that at the beginning of the project, let's just ask yourself, do you know everything there is possibly to know about this project? Do you have 100% visibility on all knowledge? Of course not. But it's assuming that you do. You have not even started working. You have not written a single line of code. You have not done anything, but it assumes that you can make a perfect project. And I would go as far as saying that when there's a difference between reality and the project plan, people tend to say that reality has a problem when they have the waterfall background,
Yes.
which is not the case. So that's where Agile comes in a very interesting way that says, okay, the project plan is not going to be perfect. Let's do sprints and let's readjust the project plan at each sprint, let's say every 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or monthly, if you do very big sprints. So Agile is more aligned with reality for the execution for a project with lots of unknown. If you're doing a very simple project like going to the grocery, you don't do Agile. You do the checklist and you do waterfall. But if you have unknowns, uncertainty, complexity, risk, things to discover, you may do a first version, the first prototype, and then a second version. You go Agile. And the other downside of this is, budget management, because how do you give a fixed price if the work scope is variable? Well, you can't. That's the simple truth.
Yeah, correct. Well, and I think Agile tends to cause more scope creeping without knowing it. I think when you when you first write down the exact plan, and then you spend a lot of time preparing things, and then you're executing that plan, it will it's you have like this blueprint of what you're going to do, and it's less prone to scope creeping. So you need educated people to prevent that. But I think it's a good. You mentioned as agile cowboys. I think that's a nice term. Could be a company's name, by the way. But
I would not hire them.
Well, what I wanted to point out is that merchants can do due diligence. They can have these conversations with system integrators, asking how they approach the project, and basically show the merchant how they do it. So not only telling them about Scrum and Agile and how great it is, but also show them a previous run project. How was it prepared? How was it executed? How was it? And I think that's that could really help merchants for not stepping into.
I agree with that. Don't tell, show it. So maybe like a confidential version. Of course, they could just like remove the client's name or something like that and show you, so that you can see what level of detail and management quality you can expect from this vendor.
Yes, everybody makes mistakes, but we all have successful projects. We all have less successful projects, but in the end, I think how you act as a professional company is something that you could show to your merchants as well.
Great. Okay. What else in terms of having a successful project here? There are, of course, some technology choices. If we're talking in integration, you have the difference between coding and no coding integration or low coding integration. Do you want to explain a bit what that is?
Yes, of course. So when we were doing a lot of Magento projects back in 2009, 2012, we needed to do a lot of integrations. And back then, we had a lot of traditional ERP systems, legacy ERP systems, and we had Magento who didn't have proper web services, like stable, scalable web services. So there were a lot of performance issues. So what we did back then, we created custom code within Magento.
Was that Magento 1 or Magento 2?
That was Magento 1, yeah.
Right.
So let me be clear. That was Magento 1.
Right.
And so we needed to create custom code to set up this connection, this point-to-point connection between Magento and the ERP system. And but when time passes, a lot of new solutions popped up. We started with 2 integrations, and then the 3rd integration came, and a 4th and a 5th. And nowadays, like successful merchants, they may have like six software systems acting as a best-of-breed solution: product information management, WMS, OMS, ERP, and so on. So what really became a problem is that those kind of integration, everything became like a spaghetti soup of integration. It was became a tangled IT landscape. So that's why we created Alumio as something that sits in the middle of all of these systems. We are the data broker, the data hub. There are a lot of terms. We call ourselves a platform as a service, integration platform as a service. But it basically allows the user to not use code to set up these point-to-point integrations, but set up an end-to-end integration via configuration. You don't need to recreate or reinvent the wheel again. And if you look at the Adobe, the platform, it's a really functional, rich platform. It's I think it's one of the most platform-rich solutions out there. It really helps merchants to rapidly deploy their e-commerce site and to scale and run their business. But if you do all of these code changes, you plug in a lot of extensions, and you're creating this giant piece of software that makes it harder to maintain and hard to upgrade. So I like to recommend merchants to stay lean and mean and focus on codeless integrations. And that's what we provide with Alumio, a way to connect to the APIs of Magento, connect to the web services of the other systems that may be a legacy system or a modern-based system, and basically setting up this central platform for the user to monitor integrations, to make changes, to add new integrations, and so on. So yeah, if we're talking about codeless integration, codeless or versus coding, sometimes you need to change some things in Magento to tailor it to the business processes of a merchant. But I think there's a pretty big shift towards keeping your Adobe Magento platform as lean as possible.
Yep,
What's your opinion about this?
Yeah, I agree with that. And of course, the main difference between the two systems is that one, you need to have a programmer do all this integration manually, those API calls, application programming interface calls, between your e-commerce website and whatever system, accounting system, ERP, enterprise resource planning, order management system, UMS, or whatever else. But that's a lot of work, a lot of risk of errors in the code, risk of maintenance, complications, and so on. And managers have no visibility whatsoever into how this thing is built. So the benefits of a no-code or low-code approach is that you have a web interface that you pretty much just enter the login credential of both systems, and then you just choose, click, drag and drop what it's supposed to do, almost if it was an automated marketing campaign in MailChimp or an Active Campaign or some of those other software that you just drag and drop stuff. If this happens, this is the trigger. If a new order comes in, then send the order to the other system. And then you have something that's visual that a manager or a business analyst can visually review if the business logic and the flow makes sense. And you don't need the programmer as long as you're in the no-code approach like this to connect systems together, which is really, really interesting.
You're lowering the threshold for technical competence. So and also for the system integrator, it's much more convenient because they have these lead developers. They used to do those kind of integrations because you need those guys to set up this connection between Adobe and any kind of system. But if you can let them do the work that is complex and interesting and something special, then the lead developers are more happy. You're removing, you're not reinventing the wheel again. You're removing repetitive work. You're lowering the threshold for technical competence because users can configure the integration. Of course, you need technical users. So let us not make it like a
it's not the magic.
No, it's not magic.
It's not magic at all. There's still even those click and drag kind of interface. You still need some technical knowledge there, but it's a lot easier to handle and to have visibility upon.
Yeah, and as a system integrator, and I think you can recall that, is that when you deliver a project, so it goes into maintenance, and the integration stops working for what kind of reason, like the ERP is offline or there's something misconfigured, whatever, you're being the first ones to be called because the merchant, they don't know what's happening because everything is connected like a black box. And so your support employees are being called, and you're answering the phone, and they always need that developer to actually identify the issue and to resolve it. But if you can move that to a platform that shows logging information, that displays monitoring, it will make it also much more convenient in the maintenance process.
Great.
But do you also recognize that when there's something going wrong with an integration, that not the ERP vendor is being called, but you'll always be called?
Most of the time, yes, it is the case, because they will call whoever did the integration, typically say, hey, my thing's not synchronizing.
Correct.
Most of the time, that's who they'll call, unless they are able to diagnose more specifically. So,
well, we had at one time we had an SAP ECC integration, and sometimes it failed, and it was a high performance website, so they processed around 2,000 orders in the evening between 8 and 9 p.m. Wow. So it was, they had these peak moments during the day. And the SAP specialists, they were like, no, SAP ACC is not down. And we were suspecting something like that. We didn't know what was happening, but sometimes the orders weren't being processed. And the merchant was pointing the finger at us, and also the SAP partner was pointing the finger at us. And it gave us like headaches. And so we implemented Alumio, and that gave us the ability to show the merchant that it was actually SAP ECC underperforming, and that it wasn't available at certain times at the moment. And that gave us the ability to tweak the rate limit a bit.
Okay. It gave you visibility and traceability.
Yeah, and that gave us a lot of confidence, and also the merchant, by the way.
Yeah, because otherwise, if you don't have that traceability log system, whenever it's a he said, she said, who knows which system was down or not responding or having rate limits issues, right? Okay. But I see a lot of benefits in lowering project risk to have a low code or no code platform, because you don't get so much into the unknown, and you're not dependent on just the knowledge of one programmer. Even if you hire a company, you typically have maybe 2 programmers or so working on the project, unless it's absolutely enormous and like over $1 million. You'll typically just have like 2 guys working on this. So at that company, you will typically have 2 guys who know how your integration works, more or less. And that is if you have 2. You might have only 1. So if that guy leaves that company, sometimes it could be loss of knowledge, and we want to prevent that. So for sure, you will want to ask for documentation of everything in the project. That's another thing to protect yourself. So let's say in an e-commerce system, you want documentation for every module. So every module that exists, why does it exist? Because sometimes just the name is not enough. It has repercussion elsewhere. So you want full documentation of everything. And the ERP, you want documentation on a general scale, how it's working, to which system it's connecting, which system is pushing to which system or pulling from which system at which frequency. You want to have some kind of a reporting here, a few pages of documentation of how the system works. That's another important point to protect yourself in those kind of projects.
Also for merchant, because sometimes like an e-commerce manager or a product owner, they leave a company, they leave the company. And the merchant, they hire a new product owner, a new e-commerce manager, and that happens quite often. And I had several conversations with new e-commerce managers or e-commerce directors, telling me that, I have this list of user stories. I have no idea what has been delivered or what is happening right now. So for business continuity and reducing risk, it's also very important to have this documentation reporting at hand.
Agreed. So that sort of ties in with the initial project plan we were talking about, having an amazing project plan. But once the project plan is built, it needs to be upkept into like what's the status for each of those tasks. Is it completed? So I've heard some horror stories from other places there that, for example, the merchant and the provider wanted to part ways, but then the provider, it was unclear like what percentage of the project was completed or which tasks were completed. They had sort of worked in a haphazard way all across the thing without any clear structure. So proper management, regardless if it's agile or waterfall or hybrid, which is a mix of both, you would have planning as to what's going to be worked on for the next phase or the next milestone or gateway of the project, or in agile we'll call it the next sprint. So let's say for the next 3 weeks, here is what we're going to be working on, and this is communicated. And then when it's done, there's a status update. This task is completed pending client approval, let's say, completed and approved by client and so on. And you have a proper total structure of all this that's going on. Very important. So you'll want to know also the reporting frequency of the vendor. Like ideally, you should have at least one status update per sprint at the minimum. The sprint can vary from 1 to 4 weeks. More than 4 weeks, not a sprint anymore in the agile framework. Correct. Here. But that's a minimum. If you can go to like weekly reports, status updates, or progress updates, that is the best.
I absolutely agree. It also prevents unclarities that are not recognized in an early stage, and over time it becomes like a problem. So I absolutely agree. Although it's also, it's in practice, this tends to be quite difficult.
Yeah, and it tends to not be done. And when the team is under pressure or short on time, that's typically one of the things they can start to skip. And then you lose the view on the project. The first thing, one of the first thing for sure, that they don't update as much, and then you don't know what's the status of all that stuff. And they will skip the step of sending the reporting to the client or giving the visibility to the client for this.
Well, and to give a little bit more context for the merchants, putting deadlines and time pressure on a project usually results in exceeding budgets.
True.
And I think that's something that a lot of merchants don't realize, is that they set like a clear goal. We want to have our new e-commerce website be deployed before Black Friday.
Right.
4 weeks before. I don't know. Just a bad example, but
it's a good 2 days example. It's a realistic one. You want like 1 month before Black Friday.
Okay. Fair enough. It's actually quite relevant. So 1 month before Black Friday, and everybody is starting to push to that date. And so the project manager tries to keep up. They can't do the reporting. They're trying to prevent scope creeping. The wrong decisions are being made, and usually it results in that you're not going to, you have to reach that date, and you're going to pass the Black Friday, and then it's going to be spring, summer. But this is just very, very relevant, and so it feels like I think strange and unusual for a company or like an entrepreneur or C-level to have like a more flexible date, but usually it results in a better project execution.
I agree with this, and let's analyze this in a more fundamental way. Like, what are the things that can change in a budget? You have in a project, let's say you have the budget, you have the timeline, and you have the margin, the profit margin of the vendor. Pretty much the 3 things that you have here. So if the amount of work increases, the timeline needs to also change. If the timeline does not change, then it means the vendor needs to deploy additional resources, staff, and effort to meet that timeline. And that is not necessarily always possible. And very often it will be that the vendor will start eating in his margin. But there's a limit to how much of this he will be willing to do, of course. So then he will start to do some pushback. And because there's pressure, let's say we have a case of exaggerated pressure for a specific date or deadline, you will have other issues that you cannot optimize for everything. I'll just do a parenthesis to maybe better illustrate this thought. You have this concept in business that are you offering quality or low price or convenience/fast service, so which of those are you offering? You can only pick one pole, and then you can have a secondary, but you cannot have the third. Like
you cannot have all 3 of them.
No, you cannot be the lowest price in the market with the highest quality and the fastest service. That's impossible, because somebody else will say, I will offer better quality, but my price is going to be higher, and I can therefore afford to scale a business with a higher quality product. Same is true for convenience or speed. Same is true for low price. So
it's a magic triangle.
You have to, exactly. So it's the magic triangle again. It's the same thing. So here you're pushing and pulling on timeline and budget. So if you want to use your budget in the most optimal way possible, it means that you need to have flexibility on the other aspects. You need to have flexibility on the time. You cannot have a variable work scope with a fixed budget and a fixed timeline. That does not work,
No.
which is tend to be the unrealistic expectation. So because there's always scope creep, there's always last minute requests and new things and rework. And also, if there's too much pressure, there are lots of time consuming validation that are just time consuming on the timeline, but they're not very long to do. So, let
Yeah.
me just open this, wait for the result, wait for the other provider to give me a confirmation, or for an expert to give me a confirmation, and then we will do the proper action based on our finding. But that will take a few days. So if
Yes.
you're stressed on the timeline, you cannot take your time to burn as little budget as possible, because you don't have time to wait. So you just take the best hypothesis and you run with it, even though it's the wrong one, and then that causes rework and inefficiencies and all
Yeah.
kind of problems. So you cannot
Yeah.
have everything, basically. So you choose only one. Which one do you want to optimize? Do you want to optimize the timeline, or do you want to optimize the budget? So
Yeah.
if you say, I want absolutely for that date and this is firm, then either you start to plan a lot in advance, and then maybe
Yeah.
with a lot of padding and buffers and several months of buffers, then maybe you can focus on optimizing your budget for a long time. And then maybe, if you're lucky, you still have enough, you plan long enough ahead that you can meet your deadline comfortably without stress, because you've
Yeah.
padded yourself plenty on the timeline to meet your objective.
Yeah, so that's what we call, what I really liked is we worked with minimal viable products. So because I think a lot of the times the scope can be downscaled easily when managers, directors, and C-level can make like realistic decisions and quick decisions. So I really like the term minimal viable product, but usually that is not sufficient to launch a product. Usually that's to me I had a lot of discussion with Scrum Masters about that actually the customer should deploy a minimal viable product, and there are some ways to do. So, for example, if a merchant is replatforming and they have like this main domain with their Magento site, and they're going to replatform or whatever, or they're going to replatform from another platform to Magento, you're going to deploy a new domain with a subset of the products, with a subset of the target audience, and then you can launch a minimal viable product. But then you have the ultimate goal. But there's a huge gap between the minimal viable product and the actual desirable product. So we introduced a new term which was minimal lovable product. And I really like that one, because it was somewhere in between, and it made a very nice conversation about, okay, this is the ultimate scope, but what is actually the right scope for you to have this thing that you can love?
Right.
So yeah, I think downscoping is, a lot of merchants find it very hard to do, and by the way, a lot of system integrators as well. I really love to downscope. I love it. I do it in everything. Also,
Yeah.
in building up my business, I downscope all the time, because it helps me accelerate and keep things maintainable and scalable and future proof.
Very good point. And the minimum viable product, I've seen various definition or confusion going on in the marketplace about this. So the official definition from the agile world, if you do your agile certifications as a scrum master or product owner, it is a commercially viable product. So it's not some kind of half-baked prototype here that
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
talking about, that's like, okay, it can
yeah,
drive, but
correct.
don't try the brakes or something. It's a
Yeah,
commercially viable product that you've simply removed some features, but whatever you're building is a professional grade product and is complete
yeah.
in itself. You just have fewer bells and whistles.
Well, let's make it very concrete. Let's say that a merchant has 4 payment options. So if they would launch like a specific site, a niche website for a certain target audience with a subset of its products, you can only have one payment payment option. That would be sufficient for that specific website. That could be your minimal viable product. It
And you're
doesn't need all of
operational.
the
Yeah, totally.
yeah.
You're operational. You don't need the other one to go live. Most merchants will be firm on, I want all 4 because I want to maximize, but that's the maximizer's mindset rather than let's accelerate this project mindset.
Correct.
And
Correct.
accelerating, I believe, is the correct mindset.
Yes, I absolutely agree. So that's it's nice to share those ideas and experiences that I had over time
Agreed.
With this subject.
Agreed. And there's a lot that comes back again to the project plan was talking about, and just the upkeep of it. For example, if it's a time and material type of project and not flat rate, or even if it's flat rate, it will typically be flat rate per module and not globally.
Mhm.
Don't buy a huge project with a global project plan price. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It will end up in conflicts. So
Yes.
it is a good idea, if it's time and material, to track module per module the actual versus the estimate.
Yes.
So the both for the internal use of the merchant and for the internal use
Yeah.
of the provider. So this way you can have honest conversations, and you can also see what's the bias of the original estimate. Are you going to have some uh, some forecasting on budget being exceeded, or does it look like the estimate were reasonably realistic, or they're off by, let's say, 20% or something like that? And then you can have some discussion with your provider about, okay, well, it seems like your estimates are about always 20% off. Like, are you giving me
Yeah.
like a flat rate, or do we remove a few scope item here and there? Or no, how do you manage that? You can foresee it and have that discussion ahead of time.
I really like transparency. So we started with the first word that popped up, which was people. And people need to collaborate, the merchant and the system integrator and the team. And being able to collaborate, you need to become like an entire team. You need to understand each other, speak the same language. So if you're transparent and you allow the system integrator to exceed certain budgets, but also to learn and to perform better, then it really helps ramping up the collaboration when there's trust. And and in the end, you need to trust the solution, the system integrator. The system integrator needs to trust the merchant. And when there's trust, you can allow exceeding a budget of a certain like detailed part of the project, but you can also help each other to perform better, to increase. Well, I think it's increasing velocity. I think that's right.
Yeah, it's
The
the
correct.
objective, to increase the velocity. You
Yeah.
become more and more productive. But for sure, for this, you need some kind of a safe environment for trust on both sides, that you can speak
Yeah.
and discuss concerns and so on, and you can have some courageous conversation. That's very important, to not hide under the rug all any kind of problems, to dare to have the courage to speak up. That the vendor has that, you can see that in the trades, and the same thing for the merchant, that you voice it up, but again, without creating that a dark atmosphere here, that it stays a positive escalation, positive discussion, courageous
Yes.
conversation, in a feeling of trust, in a safe zone for discussion.
I think positive escalation is one of the things when system integrators use the term escalation, it's usually way past the point where you should have done the escalation. And so I used to call proactive escalation. So I rather call a customer to tell that this may go wrong if we don't do anything, than to
Yeah,
wait until it happened and then call in that it actually happened. Well, we
yeah,
both know that it happened, of course. So I think positive escalation is also something that a system integrator can stimulate within the company.
yeah.
Help each other to speak up. If somebody sees something going wrong internally, do escalate it. I always tell my colleagues, escalate to me. Let me know as soon as possible when things tend or may go wrong, so we can change course.
Right. And another point, I guess, would be here future proofing. So, any tips or advice here on future proofing the investment that you're doing in the solution?
Yes. So to me, that's trying to avoid unnecessary customizations, get the best out of the core platform, create integrations, and that's what we try to tell that's it's our story to explain that you can create integrations that are future proof, that allow you to connect with an ERP system, but also give you the ability to change that ERP system to a new ERP system over time without redoing the entire integration. So I think future proofing is has a lot to do with making the right technology choices, implementing it the correct way, um, and um, and I think making sure that the knowledge is not disappearing.
Yeah, that's a good point because, for example, with Alumio here, as you're saying, let's say you have your e-commerce Magento system connected to Alumio, and Alumio is connected to the ERP. If you were to change the ERP, your Magento connection stays all in place, and you just need to
Correct.
change the connection to the ERP. If you did not have a system like that, let's say it was direct point-to-point integration, Magento to the ERP, the whole thing goes to the trash usually, and
Yeah.
then the new ERP needs to be connected, and you sort of start over more or less on your full investment of ERP connection. Sometimes there's part that
Correct.
can be salvaged, but typically not that much in the point-to-point integration.
No, no, with the middleware, well, not every middleware solution, but a middleware like Alumio allows you to set like a agreement within the middleware platform. So we call them entity schemas. It's an agreement on a data structure. And if you commit to that data structure, it allows you to plug in a different ERP in without needing to recreate the entire integration. There are a lot of middleware. Well, it's not actually the middleware. If you misconfigure it, you're still creating the integration, and that's not what we want. But so I think that would be my recommendation. Yeah, I forgot one thing. It'll pop up later.
Okay. Well, here's one more best practice in this case would be to schedule a recurring meeting cadency that's always happening at the same uh, day and
Yeah.
time. So if that's it, project is big enough to meet weekly, just for a weekly
Yes.
check-in with the vendor
Yes.
like that. So you could say every whatever Wednesday at 3 p.m. we're meeting every week. This could be for 5 or 15 minutes just to say hello if there's nothing for that week, and then we go back to work. But typically there will be a few questions, and instead of doing all kind of interruptions, we can pile them up, clear this all up in one work session. And this way, there's a close connection with both provider and client there, in addition of all the status reporting and sprint
Well,
planning for work and work demo.
yes, and what I would recommend is to also include other relevant parties. So, well, since I left the agency system integrator world and started with the product business, with a middleware platform, you usually involve with different vendors, like the system integrator, the ERP partner, some kind of other service, 3PL software, and of course the merchant. Um, but I think a lot of system integrators overlook that. So they are requesting this weekly meeting, but it's without all of the stakeholders that are involved, or all of the companies and the people. So if it touches the ERP, you need the ERP guys in that meeting as well. They may not say a word, but as soon as there is like one thing that touches the processes of the ERP, you want that clarified right away. So I would recommend to involve as much parties as possible. It's not always possible, but it benefits the progress.
Yeah, exactly. And of course, you'll have different meetings with different teams so that you don't have to invite too many people at the table at the same time and to be more efficient. But yes, you want to have
Yeah,
multiple angles of view on the same problem. And same thing if the let's say the e-commerce or the planning of it, at one point it is a good idea if the company is large enough, say at a 500 employee company here, it's a good idea to have a meeting with the head of sales and a meeting with the head of marketing and the meeting with every department head like this to be sure that everybody's needs are covered in the plan, because
yeah,
otherwise what tend to happen is, okay, the vision came from, let's say, one of the founders or whatever, he was dedicated to the project, didn't ask anybody's opinion on what they needed for the project. We build the whole thing, and then when it's built and it goes to quality control and for feedback for the merchant at the end of, let's say, a 6 month or 1 year project, whatever, then the sales rep say, hey, when we do our sales we need this and that and that. And it would be
I
nice if it
totally
had
agree.
this too. So a proper discovery and planning at the beginning, even if you some of those features don't make it, at least it was analyzed that this is not a business priority, or it is a business priority. It's going to make it to the build.
Well, if you're setting up a new business unit or you're evolving the business unit, it will touch different departments within the company. So you need to have everybody involved in a certain way to get the best out of the project and out of the actual delivery. And when you want to change like processes, you need to change people. And if you're changing people, that takes a lot of time and effort. So the sooner you bring them in, the more effective you'll be.
Right. Another best practice here that is on both sides. So of course the provider must do this, but the merchant should still keep an eye on it as well because it's a gauge for success. Is that any work that is done should be truly 100% done for this specific module or task,
Yeah.
that you don't need to revisit it later because then it will
Yeah.
not be fresh in your mind anymore. You have to
Correct.
get back into it. It's extremely inefficient. So if we're talking again, your example of a payment method, okay, maybe the project plan had up to 4 payment methods. If you've decided that it's only going to have one payment method, well, this one should work completely flawlessly and no
End
more
to end.
changes are needed to it, and you're truly done with it. So
Back and forth. Yeah.
exactly, before you move on, or you just carry that to the next sprint, the changes needed to it, and then you're truly done with it in 2 sprints.
Yeah.
So and then when you really build section by section like this for a whole project, it's a way cleaner project. I sometimes give an analogy. It's not perfect, but it's good enough that if you're doing renovation in your house, you don't start with renovating a little bit the kitchen, a little bit the living room, a little bit your bedroom, and it's going to be messy all over the place. You
Yeah.
start one section and
Well, a
you
lot of people
finish it.
do, by the way. Let's be clear.
I don't know. Well, that's how the most web projects are built. So like
Yeah.
start with one section and fully build it
Yeah.
correctly to the scope that you decide. One payment method or 4, you decide how far you go, and it's going to affect budget, of course, but truly finish what you start.
Well, and that's why phasing a project is very important because a lot of times a phase includes multiple sub projects, and if you create correct phases, you also see that some may touch each other. So if you're going to change something on the left, it may impact something on the right, and that's where you want to create the right decisions in creative phases of a project. So, and even within integration projects, we usually phase so we can really mark something as done. So this is tested, thoroughly tested. Everything is 100% sure, working as expected. We can leave that alone.
Yeah,
Leave it as
exactly. And update the
leave it to
status on
be.
the project plan properly about it.
Yes, yes, and
Exactly.
mark it.
Yeah.
It's
So
nice to check things, right?
they have something solid there. Yeah, it's pretty good coverage of the topic. Anything else that comes to mind?
Um, well, I think we could talk about this topic all night, all day, for several hours. No, I
Yes.
think we covered a lot of valuable things. I hope that the merchants, the companies who do things with e-commerce, that they could, that it benefits them. So that's yeah, I think we can wrap it up, and hopefully it helps them.
Yeah, it's true. We could talk about it for a very long time. But the specification to which you are building something is one of the main element that changes the price. Because when you look at it, yes, the website is beautiful, but once you've paid enough with a talented designer, they're all beautiful to one point. And then
Yeah.
it's a question as to which specification is it built. For example, does it need to have accessibility for disabled people with the problem with sight or blind people? Does it need whatever else, the PCI compliance and all those things? And okay, what about the loading speed? On some platform like Shopify's will be somewhat universal, but on a platform like Magento, you will have
Yes.
options for your loading
Yes.
speed based on the template that you're using, based on the technology. Do you want the classic build? Do you want the PWA progressive web app build or something that it's going to affect price? So the specification to which you're building something changes a lot the price tag. So be careful when you're comparing quotes. Like, okay, you're gonna do this, but like more details, like to which degree, where are we going with this? What's the security on this, and so on.
And don't go with fancy terms and new fancy technologies right away. it's sometimes good to be a little bit conservative.
I like to go I like to be ahead of the curve, but not too ahead. I don't
Me
want to be the
too.
first. So
Yeah,
maybe the second batch of early adopter
yeah,
when
yeah.
they've
It's good.
reworked it a bit,
It's good to be progressive, but
Yeah,
wait a little bit. Wait a little
I
bit.
agree. We do that a lot for version updates. That's for later once the website is online.
Yeah.
When the new version comes out, it often has bugs, so we wait for the next patch, and then
For the 0.1 version. Yeah.
0.1 is the preferred
Yeah.
version typically for the
Yeah,
update. Yeah, exactly. All right, Caspar, thank you for this great discussion. A very valuable
Thanks.
insight here that can help merchants. We've managed projects of several hundreds of thousands of dollars, a little short of the million, and a small project as well, like the 10K and so on. So those are things that it makes a huge difference. Like I believe people might not even realize the value of what is packed into this specific podcast episode. It's a huge.
I hope they recognize.
I hope they do, because this is huge.
Yeah.
All right. So thank you, Caspar. Thanks for being
Thanks
here.
for having me.